Hi, I'm Peter Orker from Peter Orker Piano Tuition. Despite COVID, one nice thing did happen to me in December. I was awarded my PhD. I get to be called Doctor. How cool is that? Maybe I should be a DJ, or I'm actually going to invent a new thing. I'm going to be a classical music DJ or a CJ. And you'll be able to hear about the stories behind some of the most famous works that have ever been composed. Works that everyone really should know, and you'll be finding out what makes them tick. Well, today's work is one of the most iconic piano concertos ever written. It's true to say that I was obsessed with this when I was a young teenager, and even before then, it's probably amongst the first pieces of music I ever heard on the wireless. That's what us old uns used to call the radio. This is even before I really knew what a piano was. I just remember that cascade of notes at the beginning. Of course, the more I listened to it, the more I realised there was a lot more going on other than just the piano. I could tell there was, or there were other instruments playing, orchestral instruments. They were playing along, sometimes in the background, and sometimes taking the lead. And in essence, this is what a concerto is. A solo instrument playing alongside an orchestra. Most of the time dominating the orchestra, which when you consider the size of a solo instrument, even a big concert grand piano, compared to 80 or so orchestral instruments, it's a bit of a challenge. But sometimes the solo instrument subsides into the background a little bit to let the orchestra have some of the limelight. Well, Edvard Grieg was a Norwegian composer who lived in the second half of the 19th century, from 1843 until just over the turn of the 20th century. He died in 1907. Although he was brought up in the sort of classical music world, he remained very much attached to Norwegian folk music traditions. And the influence of folk music can certainly be heard in the piano concerto, especially in the third movement. I can say the piano concerto because he only wrote this one in 1868. It's become one of the most enduring of concertos, and almost every professional concert pianist will at some point in their career have been asked to play it. Simply because it's a crowd puller, and rightly so. Don't let the musical snobs tell you otherwise. It's in 3 movements, but the first movement is the one that I want to focus on in today's video. Grieg's piano concerto is nominally in the key of A minor, and it's that what you hear when you hear that big cascade of arpeggios at the beginning. But it wanders through many other keys on its journey from the first bar to the last bar. And this restlessness of key structure is typical of music from the so-called Romantic tradition of the 19th century. As I've already shown, it starts off with a spectacular opening, starting high in the piano register, and dropping down, covering the entire range of the instrument right down to the lowest notes, and ending with that flourish of an arpeggio. Now this is something that's fairly unusual. There are, for instance, a few Beethoven piano concertos which start with piano, for example the Emperor Concerto, but most piano concertos up until Grieg began with an orchestral introduction, sometimes quite a lengthy one. And Mozart is a good example of this. But Grieg immediately takes you by the scruff of the neck and effectively says, "It's a piano concerto, damn it, and here's the piano right away." In fact, if you listen carefully, the first instrument you'll hear isn't the piano after all. It's a roll on the timpani. So he kind of sneaked that one in, didn't he? Well, after this initial flourish, the orchestra attempts to take control by announcing the first proper tune, or the first subject, as we call it. It sounds like this. And the tune continues to develop, sometimes almost playfully, until the next main tune is heard, the second subject, and first of all, again, firstly played by the orchestra. Now this is slower, this tune, and a completely different mood, more lyrical and a song-like sound. This is very common for the second subject of a movement. So it sounds something like this. Well, there are some further themes incorporated into this next section of the first movement, but now we are coming into what's called the development section of the movement, and this is where Grieg really goes to town on the different themes and puts the music through its paces. However, it's all going to be based on music we've already heard in some form or another. That's the essence of a development section. It develops the themes that we've heard already. And during this, the piano part becomes more and more manic and spectacular. And you'll notice all of this when you hear the whole movement in a minute. But before we do that, I just want to mention a section that occurs in most concertos. It's called the cadenza and usually comes shortly before the end of the first movement. This is the part where the orchestra drops out completely and allows the solo instrument to, well, basically show off. Cadenzas were originally improvised by, sort of on the spot by the player, but by Grieg's time it had become normal for the composer to write out fully the music for the cadenza. It usually consists of music that is incredibly difficult to play, and the intention really is to let the performer say to the orchestra, to the audience, "Look what an amazing player I am." Well, I can still remember as a boy listening to the cadenza in the Grieg and thinking it must need a player to deploy some kind of witchcraft to make it work. There's one section of the cadenza especially which sounds like the pianist has about 4 hands, and it's this part here. Anyway, after all that, the orchestra returns to bring the first movement to an exciting end. So now it's time to hear the whole thing, played by Alice Sarah Ott. as always, Dr. Peter's prescription is to seek out the whole work on YouTube and have a listen to all three movements. I'm sure you'll enjoy listening and getting to know Grieg's Piano Concerto in A minor. Well, thanks for watching today's video, and keep an eye out for future ones. And don't forget to, if you haven't already done so, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, because you'll be able to see all these videos again if you want to, because they're all on my YouTube channel, as are my Tuesday tips, which funnily enough I do on a Tuesday. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I'm going to say bye for now.